Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're sinking our teeth into one of humanity's most powerful and enduring myths, the dragon. For millennia, this creature has absolutely captured our imagination, popping up in stories from pretty much every corner of the globe. And that right there is the central mystery, isn't it? How did all these different societies, totally cut off from one another, all independently dream up such a similar, terrifying creature? Were they all remembering something real? Or was something else going on? Something deeper? So to get to the bottom of this, here's our game plan. We're going to trace the myth across different cultures, dive into the psychology of what makes a monster, look at how ancient fossils might have been mistaken for dragon bones, and then, this is the fun part, we'll see if fire-breathing in flight are even biologically possible. Okay, let's jump right in. The first thing we need to get straight is that the classic dragon you're probably picturing, 4 legs, 2 wings, hoarding a pile of gold, that's actually a pretty modern mashup of a bunch of different ancient myths. And before we go any further, we have to be crystal clear on this point. Unlike dinosaurs, where we have mountains of fossils, we have never, ever found a single shred of physical evidence that dragons were real. Not a bone, not a scale, not a footprint. 0. So the earliest versions of these myths had what you might call proto-draconic creatures. Think of the Sumerian Mushasu. It was this wild mix and match of animals. Eagle claws, lion front legs, a snake's head and neck. You get the idea. These were mythological patchworks, not a snapshot of a single real animal. And this is where things get really interesting, because the idea of a dragon split and went down 2 totally different paths. Over in the East, dragons were often these wise, powerful beings, almost like gods who brought rain and good luck. But in the West, they became evil, greedy monsters. You know, something for a hero to slay. That's the version Hollywood grabbed onto, and it's the one that's really stuck in our heads today. Okay, so if they weren't real, where in the world did this powerful idea come from? Well, it looks like the answer is actually buried deep inside our own minds, a kind of leftover from the dangers our earliest ancestors faced. You can really think of it like a recipe for a monster, a perfect cocktail of our most primal fears. It's a combination of everything that used to hunt us. You take the slithering, venomous snake, add the claws of a big cat, give it the wings of a giant bird of prey, and have it live in a dark cave, our ancient fear of the unknown. It's the ultimate super predator. And, the name itself is a dead giveaway. Dragon comes from the Greek word drachkon, which just means serpent. Our fear of snakes is one of the most common phobias out there, probably hardwired right into our brains to keep us safe. A dragon at its core is just the ultimate snake. So you've got this psychological blueprint for a monster just waiting in our brains. And then our ancestors started stumbling across, mysteries. Giant, freaky-looking bones buried in the earth that they had no way of explaining. You have to remember, for most of human history, there was no such thing as a paleontologist. So when you find a thigh bone the size of a person, what are you supposed to think? Even in 1677, a scientist found a dinosaur bone and figured it must have belonged to a human giant. It wasn't until 1841 that the word dinosaur was even invented. Before that, what else could they be? They had to be the bones of monsters, the bones of dragons. All right, now for the really cool part, the fire breathing. This seems like it's straight out of fantasy, no question. But just for fun, let's take a speculative dive into biochemistry and see if it's even remotely possible for a living creature to do that. I know, it sounds crazy, right? A biological flamethrower seems like a great way to cook yourself from the inside out. But if you break fire down into its 3 basic components, the idea starts to look, a little less crazy. So, to get fire, you need 3 ingredients: oxygen, a spark, and fuel. Oxygen, that's the easy part. It's everywhere. A spark? Well, imagine a special organ, kind of like a bird's gizzard, that grinds up mineral-rich rocks or even metallic plates to create a spark. And the fuel? That's the trickiest part. But there are chemicals called pyrophorics that literally burst into flames on contact with air. A dragon could theoretically make and spray something like that. And if you're thinking, no way, that's just too far-fetched, well, let me introduce you to an insect that's already doing something incredibly similar. It's not quite fire, but it is shockingly close. This little guy, the bombardier beetle, is amazing. It stores 2 harmless chemicals in its body in separate pouches. When it gets scared, it mixes them together, causing a crazy chemical reaction that shoots out a jet of near-boiling, toxic liquid. This beetle is living proof that nature can and has evolved the ability to store and weaponize super reactive chemicals. It's chemical warfare, insect style. But here's the twist. As wild as fire breathing is, it might not even be the biggest biological problem. The real deal breaker, the thing that truly makes dragons impossible, is their basic anatomy. Think about it. A classic dragon has 4 legs and 2 big wings. That's 6 limbs. But here on Earth, every single land vertebrate, that's us, birds, lizards, all of us, we all evolved from an ancestor with 4 limbs. In nature, wings are never just tacked on. They're always modified front legs, like in a bird or a bat. A 6-limbed creature would be an evolutionary alien on its own planet. But okay, let's just ignore that for a second. Even then, you smack right into the cold, hard laws of physics. The biggest animal we know of that ever flew was the pterosaur Quetzalcoatlus. It was huge, but it still only weighed about 250 kilograms. And that seems to be right at the absolute upper limit for what can actually get off the ground on our planet. And here's why. As an animal gets bigger, its weight skyrockets way faster than its wingspan can keep up. To lift something as massive as Smaug from The Hobbit, which would weigh tens of thousands of kilos, well, the wings would have to be so ridiculously huge that they would collapse under their own weight. It doesn't work. The math isn't there. So, in the end, it's not the fantasy of fire breathing that grounds the dragon. It's the simple, inescapable reality of biology and gravity. They're just too big for our world. But here's the thing you should really take away from all this. Just because they aren't real doesn't make them any less important. Dragons are like a cultural fossil. They're a projection of the very real dangers, the snakes, the predators, the darkness that haunted our species for thousands and thousands of years. They aren't a memory of a real animal. They're a story we told ourselves about what it takes to survive in a dangerous world. They are our collective nightmares, given flesh and scales and fire. And all this leads to a pretty fascinating final question. If the dragon was the perfect monster to represent the fears of the ancient world, what monsters are we creating in our stories today? What are our modern dragons?